Um, so the topic today is kind of like why grant making review processes fail. I know it's kind of a hard-hitting topic, but really the most common mistakes that we see, and then very clear action items that you can start to implement with or without Reviewr to start to solve some of these challenges. And the timing is perfect. I'm going to jump ahead here just a little bit to kind of what we're going to cover. But I literally just got off of a call about 5 minutes ago, or about 10 minutes ago, with a foundation who has invested pretty heavily into tools and systems internally to create efficiencies in their grant making initiatives. And as they did that, they again put a lot of time and energy from an admin perspective of using, CRMs and all these automations and these other tools. And what ended up happening is on the trail end, they found a whole bunch of not just inefficiencies, but negative impacts on the review and selection side. And so the entire conversation was focused around like how do we help our review team not only be more efficient, but also like ensure things like compliance, data security. And the most important component to that is providing the experience that the applicants or the grantees deserve from your foundations and from your organizations, right? Um, Time is limited. Your review team have the most critical job in a grant making initiative. How do we get them to a point where they can allocate the proper energy that the grant seekers deserve from your organization? So that's how that whole kind of conversation went. And we actually talked a lot about some of these components. So what I like to do is kind of work a little bit backwards. My entire kind of concept here is how do we kind of start to build out these frameworks of like how we want these grant making review processes to go. And you start to then backfill it with, actual action items and system improvements and things like that. So again, as we go, I will pull up Reviewr here in just a minute. And I will kind of visualize these concepts. We're not going to get super deep into Reviewr today. We're going to focus very heavily on just the review and selection side. So with all that said, let's kind of get started. I do want to kind of toss out kind of two more quick items. At some point, if any of you are interested in learning a bit more about how Reviewr could work for you, please do let us know. There's kind of a QR code pull up as well to make it very simple. I also want to remind you, I believe in the invite as well as the confirmation for today's meeting, you also may have got a link to what I call the Grant Makeover series. It's a new series that we're hosting. We'll be doing it again in 2 weeks, but we're going to probably do this every single month. And the idea behind that is we want to take real kind of grant making scholarship program initiatives that are happening outside of Reviewr, non-clients of ours, and then take those experiences and kind of transform them of what the day in the life would look like using Reviewr. So that webinar will be like a real time kind of like analysis of the program before Reviewr. We'll walk you through kind of what we did for them in our system. And so I think there's going to be some good feedback that we'll be able to give. For those of you that are interested in submitting your programs, we're going to go ahead and select one per month. Obviously, the person that gets selected will get a license of Reviewr. So if you're interested in kind of tossing your hat in the ring, by all means do so. So I want to kind of go back to what I just mentioned beforehand of that last conversation I had. Again, it started with saying, here's all the things that we did to make our operational lives easier. And then here's what ended up happening on the review side, right? So it turned into very manual processes for the review team. They're using systems and tools not intended for the task at hand. They got reviewer fatigue, so they were spending a whole lot of time and energy, reviewing grant applications that they didn't have to spend. There was ways to systematize it. And that led to not only kind of poor quality reviews, but a lack of volunteers year over year. And then in conjunction with that, it kind of trails into the impact on the grantees. So lengthy delays in communication, uncertainty if their applications were even reviewed, a lot of question marks around like the fairness and the arbitrary nature of the review, a lack of feedback for those that didn't get selected. And of course, you have very unfortunate candidates who go unfunded for potentially reasons that we can solve. So again, I want to make sure that we think through these programs. A lot of times we say, look, how do we as admins create efficiencies? And as much as we love you guys, and we certainly will make your life easier using Reviewr, you make up a third of the program, the grantee experience, and then the review experience, who are stakeholders or volunteers, are equally, if not more important. So I want to make sure that we kind of use that term experience as we go, because that's really what it's about. To the couple questions that came in, we will be probably tomorrow, maybe this afternoon, sending out a recap of this. So the deck, the recording, as well as kind of a blog post with clear action items that you guys can start to implement as well. So yes, keep an eye out from that. It'll come from me directly, Kyle@reviewr.com. So yes, we'll certainly get that sent your way. So the first thing I want to look at, and I'm not going to get too deep in like some of the challenges I think people face now. I think I can just kind of quickly raise of hands, increase the size. Yeah, I can certainly make this a little bit bigger here. So as I'm doing that, kind of a quick show of hands. In your current kind of grant making initiative, are you using tools, or is it a lot of, emails, spreadsheets, downloading of documents, using tools like Google Drive, recompiling nomination packets and trying to ship that off to the review team, giving them spreadsheets, them trying to send it back to you? That's kind of very much like what the common life looks like in grant making. And that's all good and dandy. Those are all tasks that kind of go into the process. But the goal is to kind of have a systematized approach that has, dedicated tools for the task at hand, right? A carpenter isn't going to use a screwdriver to hammer in a nail. They're going to use a hammer. So that's kind of where we become the hammer in your tool belt. So the first thing I want to look at is kind of creating a fair and equitable review framework, because from there you start to backfill it with all the kind of components and elements that you need to actually execute it against it. So I'm going to briefly touch on a couple different topics, and I'm going to jump right into Reviewr and then visualize this for you. The first and most obvious one is the redaction of information. So at any point in time at a high level, if there's any content that you collect in your grant applications that could alter the perception from the review committee, we by all means want to avoid showing it to them. I know it's easier said than done. You have to collect a whole lot of information, and the redaction of information becomes more challenging when it's in like long form content or if it's in file uploads. But we want to make sure that when your grant team sits down to go to do a review, that they're focusing on the merits of the submitter and the content and quality of their projects and their proposals and their work, not who they are or the demographics that they serve, etc. This is very common in scholarships, but I do feel very passionate that as a grant making organization, we want to fund the most impactful programs. And so taking out all subjectivity, I think, is absolutely critical. The other thing I want to address on that, though, is also like the redaction of unnecessary information. Many of you are collecting a lot of content in your grant app, from file uploads to long form content. And some of that might be used for internal record keeping purposes only, which is great. You certainly do need that. It could be like tax documentation, or it could be like 501(c)(3) statuses. But if that doesn't actually serve a value to the review committee, we also want to redact that as well. They have limited time and kind of to do the review. So we don't want to overwhelm them by giving them a whole bunch of stuff that's not really intended for the task at hand. So the entire concept here is that we only want to show the review team exactly what they need at that given moment. And you also may consider not even collecting a bunch of that information from everybody. This is not part of today's conversation, but to lower the experience for the grantees. Yes, at some point you may still need those documents or deliverables, but you may not need it from everybody right away. So maybe as you start to make your selections and get deeper into those workflows, then you have the grantees to come back and do some of the more robust file uploads, because it's more intended for them. Don't waste your time on people, obviously, who aren't going to make it that far, submitting stuff that you don't need right away. I also want to talk about impact focus scoring. So, how many of you guys, and again, you can use like an emoji or a thumbs up, are using some type of like built-in score sheets or rubrics to help your review team quantitatively rank the grantees? We'll kind of get into like why that's a critical component. What I do want to offer, though, and this is again, and I didn't talk about this, but Reviewr was named Reviewr because that was the life that we lived. We actually served on review committees for funding opportunities. So we have kind of a unique perspective, not just from a software perspective, but we lived that life. And when you give your team a score sheet or a scorecard with a bunch of numerical values, it's very easy to get bogged down in numbers. So, for example, like if you have a budget that you collect and you say, "Hey, review team, rank this sustainability of this budget on a scale from 1 to 20," they get very bogged down in like 16 versus 17 or 17 versus 18. And it seems like maybe a small thing on a per person basis, but when you have multiple people doing reviews and you have a large number of submissions, and large is relative, it could be 30, it could be 130. That number does start to compound, especially when you start to average it. And you may find yourselves like looking at like the top grantees and trying to make these tough decisions when they're like only a half point or a 1 point difference between like 10 to 12 people. And so what I typically recommend, and we'll look at this, is try to do impact focus scoring based off of an emotional response. And so thinking through like what do you as a grant making or a foundation value in a grantee? That's how you structure your scorecards. It's going to be very metric driven. But then from there, you start to ask your review team on a scale from like good to great. I know that's a very simple example, or from below average to exemplary. And what ends up happening is behind the scenes, you still assign point values to their choices, but when your teams and your committees come in to do the review, they're going to move substantially faster because they're not trying to like decipher 14 versus 16. They're just offering a very quick and simple and emotional response to that prompt. But behind the scenes, typically an emotional response is a better response than trying to get bogged down in numbers. So you still get the data that you need to make selections, but you're not bogging down the review team and you're going to get higher quality reviews. If any of you guys are already doing that, I'd love to see that. It is a big trend that we've started to see. It's also very helpful when you guys go to do deliberation. You can still leverage the metrics and the raw scorecard data to say, hey, like here's the rankings. But then from there, the teams can kind of talk and deliberate and make compelling cases for one another. And it's easier to do so from an emotional perspective. The next thing I want to look at, and again, I will visualize this, is randomized assignments. So here's a metric that might be surprising for many of you. On average, a volunteer reviewer can't look at more than 26 entries or grant applications. There's some wiggle room there depending on how complex your grant applications are, as well as how complex your selection processes are. But generally speaking, if you gave me as a reviewer 50 submissions to look at, I physically will not give the same energy to number 40 as I gave to number one. And that inherently is going to penalize somebody because of that. So then we have to start to think through, okay, well, like what is the workload capacity for our volunteers and for our teams and for our committees? And we have to kind of play this game of like how many submissions can I give each one of them while still ensuring that the grantees get the proper number of reviews and eyes on them. And without growing your team substantially, I understand that can be very, very challenging. So one of the things that we like to look at here at Reviewr is saying, look, like, do we really need each grantee to get looked at by every single person? Like, what is the minimum number of reviews do we need to get a good snapshot or a picture of the viability of their grant application? And that's kind of the number that we focus on. Once you have that information, then we can start to leverage tools and automation to make it simple. So say that number comes out to be five, and I'm just making up numbers here. So maybe you want every grantee to be reviewed by five different evaluators, and you don't want your team to look at more than 25 people. At least in Reviewr, we can actually plug those numbers in, and then the system can equally and randomly take your applications and then distribute them out to your team to share the workload. So it's a way to not overwhelm the reviewers and kind of fatigue them, but at the same time, giving the applicants and the grantees the attention and enough reviews to kind of get a good snapshot of their viability. So from there, we kind of get into what I call score normalization, which I think for many of you might be one of the number one takeaways today is whenever you go through this random process of signing them out, that implies that not every grantee gets reviewed by the same people. So then the question comes into play is what happens if I've got a staff member or a volunteer who is on average just tougher or more lenient than other people? So if I, as Kyle, the grantee, got reviewed by somebody named Barbara, who on average is a very, very strict evaluator, I will be penalized versus somebody else who got reviewed by somebody who gives high scores left and right. So if we know that's happening, which it will happen 100% amongst your teams, how do we give you a visibility to kind of figure out like what is the individual judging tendencies from your team, which helps you combat that, but it's also kind of a good indicator of like how do we do our training amongst our staffs? How do we kind of level set the expectations? How do we kind of get them all to look at your grant applications through the same lens of what fulfills your mission, right, versus subjective scoring? And we can start to backfill it by actually normalizing the results. So in my example, like if I as Kyle am on average a tougher evaluator, is that a bad thing? Probably not. You know, you have me as part of your review team because you value my feedback and you value my opinions. So what we want to do is figure out like what is my own personal judging tendencies, like how am I on average reviewing people, and then start to take that into consideration. So you're not going to penalize an applicant who got reviewed from me because I scored lower than somebody else. What you really care about is like, did I score that person higher or lower than my own personal benchmarks? And I think a lot of the results on those can be very eye-opening. I am going to show you an example of a of an organization that had this challenge. I have all of their data redacted. You can actually visually see it happening in real time. And the last thing I want to look at here is the ethical use of AI. We certainly will come back to that. I'm not naive. Like we are moving towards a very AI-driven age. It's growing, I think, faster than many of us ever could have fathomed or thought. Our commitment to you at Reviewr is going to be at the forefront of it. We want to give you guys all the tools that you need, but at the same time, you know, working within our current clientele to build ethics committee and do things the right way. I do have some split kind of thoughts on this. There's a lot of organizations that are trying to move towards a 100% driven AI review process where you take grant applications come in and then using AI to basically tell you who to fund. And I have mixed feelings because you've got decades of flawed data and processes that are training those models. With that said, I think there's some really impactful things that we can do to audit the grant application or profile and then basically load in like what is your mission and your vision, like what do you value in a grantee, what are you looking for, and then using that information to start to build what I call like leaderboards or rankings for you based off of that. And then from there, we start to inject a very authentic human element to, check the information. You still do your reviews, you still do your selections, and it's very likely that the pre-ranking from AI will help your team, identify things that maybe they missed initially or train those models. Now, that's the very extreme use case of where AI is going to be used in grant making, and it's going to go there, right? Like, I have a hard time even visualizing 5 years from now, like what this is going to look like. But then if you start to backtrack, like what are some of the more low-hanging utilizations of AI? And I'm going to jump into the next slide here because I'm going to start to talk about that, and then I'm going to visualize everything we just talked about. Many of you have very clear eligibility and criteria or things that you're looking for in a grantee. Again, react with an emoji. How many of you guys are spending a substantial amount of time reading through grant applications just to verify if they're even eligible for your program? So some very impactful like matching tools that we can talk about, as well as like pre-eligibility checks that can basically on the front end look at a grantee's profile and say, look, like, are they even eligible? Yes or no? And it seems like a small thing, but it compounds significantly. So if you spend 5 minutes for 20 people doing that, we're saving you hours. And then on the grantee side of things, we're not wasting their time applying for funding that they just physically can't achieve. If you've got a grant for people in North Carolina and I from Nebraska try to apply, like don't waste my time because I, as a grantee, am not going to read, right? People applying for funding are just going to apply to literally anything and everything. And so it's a better experience for them. It helps you get more high quality people to come through. The other piece of that is if you offer multiple funding opportunities, many times grantees don't even know what's available for them. I see time and time again that you offer grants to a very niche group of people that go underfunded or underapplied for because they don't even know it exists. So how do we leverage tools to basically build a persona about the grantee? And then from there say, look, based on the information that you're giving us, these are the opportunities that we actually have available for you that you align with. Now go apply for them, but do it very, very simple. Other kind of cool things that I want to address here is summarization. So how do you take a large number of grant applications, kind of take their file uploads, take their submission forms, summarize the content in more bite-sized pieces, often very helpful for internal vetting purposes, but also when you go to do the review, it kind of gives you a snapshot of who the grantee is, and then you can start to deep dive into everything else. And then the last piece of this is a concept called OCR. I don't want to get too technical today, but I believe many of you guys are collecting file uploads. And one of the biggest challenges with files is A, the viewing of them, which I'm going to get into, and then B, digesting that information and comparing it to their submission. So if I, as Kyle, am a grantee and I uploaded a tax document, how do you actually verify that what I said about myself matches my 1040 or whatever the deliverables might be? Or if you're collecting documents that have data that you need to redact, how do you do so? So the general idea is that in real time, we can look at reading file uploads, pulling the data out of the file and putting it back into the applicant's profile. And then once you do that, you can redact the information instantly. You can do real-time analysis and comparisons of like, did their income actually match their taxes, right? Whatever it might be. So I'll kind of leave it at that. I am too in real time going to toss this out there as well for you. There is a product called Grant Guardian, and I will share this link. It's actually a product by the Patrick McGovern Foundation. It is free for all foundations, I believe. Right now, they do not allow for integration partners. I am in talks with them to figure out like how we can work together. But what Grant Guardian does is it uses AI as well as some of their metrics to do like nonprofit status checks, but also uses their tools to basically build a financial analysis of the potential grantee. So it gives you their financial viability. So a lot of our clients are looking at using tools like this, and then using Reviewr as well from like a subjective human review process to help kind of build a better comprehensive picture of the grantee, more so than just budgets, projects, and storytelling, but also financial viability of who you're going to fund. So I will share this again. It's not Reviewr by no means, but I think they're doing some really cool things, and there's ways to use them together. So before I kind of preview Reviewr, I talked a little bit about the evolution of AI, the pre-screening review. I do want to talk about a little bit though, like the reviewer experience. So great, you implement all these concepts and all these thoughts. How do you now lower the barrier for the team coming in to conduct the review? I've got two little kids. If I'm part of your review committee, I'm certainly going to be doing this on my couch, on my tablet at 10:30 at night. And so I physically can't be downloading and exporting and using spreadsheets. I'm using a tablet. So how do you create like an ecosystem where they can kind of come in, view all the submissions side by side, leaving notes, leaving comments, filling out your score sheets, viewing the documents and not have to download them? We live in a time where files are getting substantially larger and there's so many different file types. We can't afford a evaluator to not even be able to access the content being shared with them. So how do you create like an intuitive system where they can kind of in real time view everything in one spot, leave their comments, leave their notes, leave their score sheets, and also track progress? Because I'm also not going to sit down and do, 30 reviews at one time. I'm going to do 10 today, 5 tomorrow, and then maybe 10 Saturday morning while I drink my coffee. So how do I, as a reviewer, know exactly where I left off, who I should be reviewing again, and then giving me visibility of how I conducted my reviews? Because I may want to go back and like reevaluate a couple people now that I have like a benchmark to compare against. Maybe I was too strict on one person, or I want to compare one candidate to another. So again, they seem like simple things, but we have to be able to do this in a very intuitive manner. So what does all of this look like? I do want to start on the front end, on the pre-screening review. So the idea, and this is a really good example, is to basically help create a persona about your applicants. So as they're kind of creating their profiles and filling out their grant applications, many of our clients will say, hey, answer these questions. And this is a very simple rudimentary example. But basically what we're doing is we're loading into Reviewr all of the criteria, eligibility, requirements, and what you're looking for in a grantee. Then what happens is the grantee answers a series of questions that align with that. And then what we can do in real time is basically say, are they eligible? Yes or no. If not, you can give them a message, you can stop them, or you can allow them to proceed on and then flag them accordingly. And if they are eligible, they can proceed on as normal. What we're also doing in this example is we're saying, great, not only are you eligible, but this is actually what you're eligible for. We offer, 7 different grants. These are the 3 that you best align with. Whichever all of them do you want to apply for? So the goal here is we're lowering the barrier for applicant success by kind of guiding them through an experience versus them trying to figure out what to do next. And then from there, you kind of get into a very standard grant application where you collect budgets, short form content, all the content and deliverables that you guys need. I want to jump now again to some of the review side. So where things kind of take off is now you've got a dedicated command center to manage the grant operations. So dashboards that show you progress in real time, recent activity, if people are done or not done. You have email templates, you can send reminders. But I want to really look at here is those review workflows. So I don't know if any of you currently have like committees in charge of reviewing your grant applications, or if you are doing randomization. But the idea is to leverage automation to take your grant applications and then start to segment them and bucket them for you. In this example, this organization offers multiple different grants. So obviously the system is basically saying, hey, Kyle applied to the Bobby Gatsby grant, therefore put him in that bucket. With that said, it could be phases. So phase 1, phase 2, interview, final selection, and then ongoing data collection from grantees like impact reports and impact surveys. Why this is really powerful, though, is what you can basically do is take a bucket full of applications and then share it with the team. So whenever Simon, Paula, and Mark come into Reviewr, they're only going to review the submissions in their bucket. When Sally, Sue, and Steve come in, they only review the submissions in their bucket. So it's a really powerful way to segment submissions. If your team is reviewing candidates, then you can put them into all the buckets. That's fine. But what I want to show you next is when you open these buckets up, here's where the automation and randomization comes into play. So hypothetically, let's just say we had 110 grantees in this program and we have a 10-person review committee. You don't want them to review 110 people. So the system will actually show you a list of all of your grant applicants, and then B, who your team is. And you can start to type in those numbers. So you could say, hey, you know what? I want every grantee to get reviewed 5 times, no more, no less. And then you could also say on top of that, but I also don't want my team to review more than 25 people. Once you type those numbers in, the system will then equally and randomly take your grant applications and then share the workload amongst the staff based off of those numbers. Once done, it shows you who got paired with who. And if you ever wanted to override that and manually pair people up or unassign people, you can do that. So I really like that model. Another common trend that we've started to see is letting your team and your review committees do what they want. And what I mean by that is you're going to have some people who are empowered to review 30, 40, 50 people. When I said that on average, they can't look at more than 26, that's typically like, again, it's an average and it's in a time block. But you are going to have people who are going to time block more time and they want to do every single one of them. And that's great. We should empower them to do that. You also have evaluators and reviewers who may have good intentions, but something comes up, life happens, and they can't fulfill their obligations. So if you do these random assignments or you give them submissions and they drop out or something happens, obviously you have to have visibility and be able to remind them, but you have to be able to be reactive and then reassign them back out. So what many of our clients will actually do is they'll say, look, let's take all of my grant applications and we're going to give it to all of our team, right? And anybody who you want to be a reviewer can review everybody. And then what you do is you set a threshold. So you say, but I want every grantee to get reviewed 6 times or 8 times or 10 times. And so when the review team comes in, they get a random list because you don't want them to all work off the same list. So they're all going to get a random list of who's been assigned and they can start scoring. Once that submission or grantee has hit that threshold 10 times or whatever that number is, they then fall off that list. So when your team comes in to conduct a review, if it shows up for them, it means that grantee still needs to be reviewed a certain number of times. So again, it empowers them to review as many or as little as they want, while still ensuring that the grantee gets the exact same number amongst their staff. So it's a really impactful way to kind of pair up people. Like I mentioned before, this does pose a giant risk though, because in this example, like what if I go back a page, what if I go back to my team, what if on average Simon is a way more strict judge than Paula? We have to be able to visualize that. So what happens here is your review team come into a very simple system. Again, they're doing this at Wednesdays on their tablets, and they get a list of who they're in charge of reviewing. If you are going to redact data, obviously things will look a little bit different. It may not show name or organization, it just shows their IDs. And then they simply open the grantee up and they get a nice little split screen that on half of the page shows them the profile or the grant packet. And then the other side of the page is your selection tool. Now, in Reviewr, selection tools are completely customizable. I've seen thumbs up, thumbs down. I've seen weighted scoring. I've seen pure comment boxes. This example, however, does highlight what I talked about earlier, where we're trying to elicit an emotional response. So every question that you see here, from success measurements to funding needs to project summaries, those questions are in alignment with what this grant making organization is looking for in a grantee. However, instead of saying rank their alignment with our mission and vision on a scale from 1 to 50, it's from good to great or from poor to above average. So the review team can side by side, read the grant application. They can look at the file uploads. Like I mentioned beforehand, all of your file uploads do get embedded into the system. So if they want to look at a document, they just simply press view and then it shows up directly in front of them side by side with their note-taking tools. So they never have to download or export. And then once they're done, they just simply submit their reviews. Now, again, this is an emotional response, but behind the scenes, we still have point values. So if I might get 1 point for poor and then 5 points for exemplary. The key to that, though, is you can also weight these. So maybe I, as a grant making organization, care far more about how they align with my mission and vision than I care about their long-term sustainability. That's a bad example. I get that. But you can also then start to weight these as well. So what happens is that once this gets submitted, you and your team in real time get these leaderboards, and it shows you a list of literally every grantee, who review them individually, collectives, totals, averages, comments, whatever data you're collecting from your review committees. And then you can start to visualize the results. So for many of you, if you are using scorecards, like I mentioned, you can rank them from high to low, and those may be the decisions. For most of you, however, you might have a multi-phase program. That's great. You can start to select people, advance them to phase 2, phase 3, final selections, or more common, this page gets used for deliberation. So these are the results. Now the review team kind of comes in, we get together either in person, through Zoom, or virtually, and we talk about the results. Just because the data says one thing doesn't mean there's not a compelling case for somebody else. We give you guys the data that you need to make the best decisions you can, but ultimately you are the ones that are making the decisions. I'm trying to be sensitive to the time, so I want to touch on a couple other small things quick. You can kind of see it happening here, though. So Mark scored this applicant at 12, but then Judge Judy scored it a 31. So right away, I have got red flags going off left and right. So my question then becomes, okay, did Mark score Sheldon low because it was a poor quality submission? He saw something that somebody else didn't? Or what if Mark, on average, has literally never given higher than a 14? By his own standards, he or she scored Sheldon extremely well, but that grantee is now being penalized because the score is way lower than other people. So not to get too deep into like how this will look, but we do offer these pretty cool normalization reports. So to jump way ahead in the green here, and this is the real client that I talked about where the data has been redacted. You can kind of see that on average, Judge Judy in the green scores about a 24, but then over here, Tony scores about a 34. So literally, there's a full 10-point swing between these two people. This is a real client, and they asked, why is it that every year whoever Judge Judy reviews never gets selected? It's very clear because she, on average, scores way lower than everybody else. So now that we know that, we can start to make decisions. We can, talk about why Judge Judy scores the way that we did. We have to train her, bring her up to speed on like what we're looking for, or maybe we say, you know what, we don't care. What we really care about though is your averages. So in this example here, you can basically say, well, Bruce scored a 29. That means that Judge Judy scored Bruce like 1.2 times higher than her personal average, whereas Elon scored, almost 20% lower than her own personal average. Now that we know this, the results can look kind of goofy, but they're super powerful. It re-ranks people. So the final results would basically say, hey, Bruce is our highest rated applicant because amongst all the review teams, he or she scored 1.15 times higher than average, and Elon scored, 0.83 times lower than average. So just because, somebody might have scored Elon a 29, doesn't mean that that was a good score. It just means that they scored, below or at their average. So I think this is a really impactful report. It might be very eye-opening for you guys to kind of understand the judging tendencies of your staff. And then if you want to take it a step further, it absolutely and certainly will, help you guys make more fair, accurate selections. So I covered a lot of these items there very quickly to help you guys kind of visualize it. I talked a lot about the ethical use of AI. It's a bit hard to showcase just because, the tools are obviously all AI related. We've talked about the score normalization and the random assignments. I do want to kind of run through a couple things in the background, but as I'm doing that, I think I went 4 minutes over, so pretty good. Any questions, comments, thoughts, please do toss them in the chat. I want to make this as interactive as possible. As I'm waiting for those to come in, though, the byproduct of what we just discussed also influences data security compliance. It's not a fun or sexy conversation to have. Nobody likes to get deep into the weeds on like data encryption and privacy law, but it's very important. You'd be shocked at how many times I've heard lawsuits happen or those that maybe don't get funded come back seeking why. And we have limited information to kind of help guide them. And it kind of poses a compliance and potential audit risk to you guys. So it's critical that whatever tools and platforms that you use, first and foremost, you own your data, right? You have to own your own information. Number two is all of the fun things to talk about are being considered. So privacy regulations, built-in audits, if you are collecting financial information or budgets, how are you storing it in a safe, secure manner, all that kind of stuff. What that also leads to is a concept called a proof of process. So this is a bit polarizing. However, as I structure grants, I want to make sure I am as transparent as possible because that has a direct impact on us as a grant making organization. So for all of my grants, what I want to do is I want to say on the very front end, this is our proof of process, which is basically, look, when you apply for funding through my foundation, this is what's going to happen. These are the questions that you're going to be asked. These are the timelines. Your data is going to be redacted. Your submissions will be randomly assigned to our team. We are going to use a quantitative scoring model that removes any subjectivity. Here's what the scorecards look like. That way you can take that into consideration as you're building your grant application. The biggest hurdle most grant writers have, because again, we live on both ends of the spectrum, is that they write their grants and they write their proposals, and then they have no idea what the grant making organization is looking for. So they might be a really compelling organization, but they wrote their proposal wrong based off of what they're looking for. So you kind of help increase the quality of the review by kind of bringing that visibility. And then what happens is that whatever platforms or tools that you use, they have to align with that proof of process because at some point, if you go through auditing or go through compliance checks, you have to be able to prove that you follow the process that you said that you were going to do. And that's how we build a community-driven program, which is a very trustful process to our stakeholders. The next piece of that is if any of you ever get phone calls from grantees asking for feedback, most grant writers are left in the dark. Many of them want some type of high level feedback. It does allow you to have automation. So some of our clients are super transparent. They say, look, you weren't selected for a grant, log back in and see why. And they show the scorecards that were used, they show the comments that were left. Now, that's an extreme example, but it also allows you to have that data in case you ever do want to provide subjective feedback to them. Question came in around, and so that's kind of the bulk of what I want to talk about. I am going to answer some questions now, so please do toss in any questions, comments, or thoughts that you might have, or anything else that you want me to address today. Question came in about who the reviewers are and how are they selected by various organizations. So you own your own staff and your own team. So at the end of the day, you'll load in who your review committees and staff are. Once they're loaded into Reviewr, they're simply invited, and then they'll access whatever grant applications you pair them up with. You could also do an open call for evaluators. It's not uncommon for grant makers to want to bring in external evaluators, especially as programs grow and you don't want them to review 50, 60, 70 people. So you could spin up like a form in Reviewr, which is an open evaluator or external reviewer form, and you start to gather key insights about who they are, what's their industry expertise, what's their background. That allows you to vet them to make sure they align with your mission. And then from there, you simply just move them into the reviewer stage, right? So they're already in the system. Then you can start to pair them up. How can we facilitate committee conversation regarding a particular grant application if not all judges have seen the application because of it? So great question. So in Reviewr, you can also grant view-only capability. So you might randomly have them reviewed. However, you can still allow the entire broader team to review or view all the submissions. What happens more times than not, though, is that you conduct the internal review and selection process, and if you want to, use the randomization process. And then once the results come in, generally most of our clients and what we see happening is you don't want in real time your review team to see the results from other evaluators. You don't want that to alter their perception of how they're scoring. It should be very individual. However, once the results kind of come in and the feedback and scores and notes have been submitted, you lock it down so no new scores can be added because you've already conducted the reviews. And then you can either share that out in Reviewr, and you can also do so anonymously. And so that way the team can kind of view all the submissions, see the comments, see the notes, see the scores. And then if you are having like deliberation meetings or a collaboration session, they're coming prepared in advance. Do most grantors post their evaluation scoring and questions for applicants to see the scoring qualifications? Yes, I don't know if it's very common. At least within Reviewr, we strongly recommend it. That goes back to the proof of process. Because at the end of the day, right, like we're trying to provide opportunity. We want to put our grantees also in the best position for success. You want to get the best information from them to make your best decisions. And also you want the quality of applications to be superior. So the more visibility that you have on a grantee, aligning them with what you're looking for and kind of you can even give them examples, right, of prior selected grantees. It allows them to kind of build a better portfolio or submission for you, which just benefits everybody as we go. Great questions. As I mentioned early on in this conversation, I will stay for as long as you guys want. So whatever questions come in, I'll hang out for as long as you guys want today. And again, these questions don't necessarily have to be related to Reviewr or today's conversation. Like I mentioned before, we're very fortunate to live in a space where we have access to a lot of resources, and many of them are faced with the same challenges that you guys have. So if I personally don't have any thoughts or opinions, which I always have opinions, I certainly can help you guys find resources and make introductions. Yes, this video will be shared out either today or probably potentially tomorrow morning. We will share a full recap of the conversation. It'll be converted to a blog post with some action items. I can even include some interactive like tours of the platform, as well as like the full video recap and recording. Question came in around, does Reviewr have the ability to survey applicants? Love the question. So I'm a firm advocate of surveying both applicants and your review team, right? This is how you grow. And also from Reviewr's perspective, like with enough time and money, you can virtually build any software. I have extreme certainty that any of you who want to leverage Reviewr, it's going to certainly benefit your program. With that said, nobody knows more about the space than you guys on boots on the ground. So we work very closely with our clients to kind of figure out, like from their own personal experiences, like how can we grow? So everything that you see here is built by the people for the people. It's driven by people like yourselves. And I'm a firm believer that you should be surveying applicants and your review team for feedback around processes, program related technology, and then you leverage that data from year over year to continue to refine your programs. We always want to be taking two steps forward, no steps backwards. So there's that element to it. But there's also the ongoing data collection from grantees. And I get this isn't part of today's conversation, but this is what Q&As are for. So I struggle with measuring ROI. Again, I've been involved in these programs for so long. How do we prove that the funding that we're doing is changing people or organizations or community lives? And so it's essential for you to collect ongoing data from grantees, not just surveys on improving process, but also like impact reports and ongoing data collection. So I'm going to run through it quickly a different example. This is a scholarship program, just because I have it pulled up, but the process is identical. What ends up happening is maybe hypothetically we want to take Michael here, and Michael was selected for a grant, or maybe this was Acme Corp, right? If it's a nonprofit grant. They move into a new workflow called grantees, or whatever you want to call it. From there, they come back to their profile and they click add new. And ideally, you systematize this so there's very clear like deliverables that you request from people. And so, to your question, this also could be a survey. They select from the list what they want to fill out, and then it opens up directly. So this could be your survey, or in this example, this is actually a grant impact report. So it's, tell us more about how much you received, tell us more about the dates and deadlines, what were your initial goals versus the actual outcome, and what were the discrepancies between them? What were some of the KPIs that we were measuring? What was the qualitative and quantitative impact of your project? How are the funds used, right? Like what was the original budget versus expenditures? They could also upload receipts at this point. Lessons learned, which I'm a huge advocate of, sustainability, and then additional file uploads. So what happens here is when you move people to this phase, you also have to have visibility. So you need to know who is in the impact reporting step. Are they done or not done? If they're not done, we have to be able to send them reminder messages, right, to get them to cross the finish line, but it's very low barrier for them. They just come back in via a link, click add new, fill it out. Once they're done, this and the survey gets logged on their profile. So when I press view, I can view the survey results or I can view the results of the impact report. And then when you start to do reporting to aggregate that, it becomes very easy because all the data is living together. So a question came in about a very rural area where you support island communities. How do you create equity for evaluation where one grantee has 2,500 participants, whereas an island grantee impacts six people a year, but is no less emotionally important? Yeah, it resonates, right? So our home offices are in Lincoln, Nebraska. Very, very proud to be a Midwest company. Serve probably a very similar demographic, and I think that's where when you structure your review scorecards, you have to take a step back and look at like what is our mission and vision as a foundation or as an organization? Like first and foremost, like what is that we're really trying to do? And once you can start to identify like what you value, that's then how you can start to measure like the impact that you want to have. And then when you conduct your grant review process, how you evaluate and score grantees, those questions have to align with your mission and your vision. And you can weight them separately, right? So again, like if you've got 2,500 participants, some of the more like mathematic numerical values are going to be flawed because they have quote unquote higher impact because they're serving a larger community. However, like maybe that small island grantee that you're talking about actually is in better alignment with your mission and vision. So you can consider weighting that element of your scorecard, 20% higher and things like that. So really it's like taking a step back and looking at it from like a mission vision perspective, the impact that you want to have, and then having clear guiding principles as you do the review. That's not just about like how many people can we impact, but like what is it, how does it serve our mission and vision? So a question came in around, can reviewers send a grant winner email template that inserts the award amount? It might be different than the application amount they apply for. Yeah, there's many ways to do that, and we certainly can. I can kind of, in a more personalized conversation, walk you through that. Because ultimately, since it's profile driven, like you're logging the results. So like they might have applied, I'm going to make up a simple number, $1,000 grant, but you only funded them for 500. You can log that information and you can certainly send that information via email. I try to avoid sending emails with dollar amounts. It seems like a small thing, but like the dollar symbol itself is often a spam flag, believe it or not. And so what I prefer to do is log that communication in Reviewr. So if I go back to a grantee's profile here, you'll notice that off to the right, we do have a question and comment section. So you can log all that information over here. This would be like your email body or whatever information you want to send them. And then what happens, it'll trigger an email notification from Reviewr. However, the actual content is not in the email. So it helps you avoid things like spam filters. Also, I try to avoid sending too much private information via email, via inboxes, right? It seems like a small thing, but like there's obviously like if their email is compromised and a phishing attempt happens because they know they got a $400,000 grant for you, they now be targeted. So you send the notification, they then come back into Reviewr, and then from there they can view the content. And if you want them to then take action, such as accepting the funds by filling out like an e-signature or whatever ongoing data you have, now they're already in Reviewr, so it's very easy for them to take the next steps.